Hey everybody, and welcome back to our scenario playthrough series. We're on Future World part number 3 today. This is the second to last part in this series. Now, we have long passed the scenario goal. We did win with the 1,500 guests by the end of October year 3. But there is a lot of parks still to build out, and we've just kind of found our stride in the last episode in terms of overall look and feel of these projects and kind of what this whole thing is going to look like. So, we've got a little bit of work to do today. We're going to build our last coaster, and we're going to do some general cleanup and things. If you recall from the last episode, we had redone the dive coaster here to be a little more realistic, a little more simplistic compared to what the starting one was. Now we're going back through and clearing out our entrance plaza here. I never really liked how this was set up initially. It just didn't quite feel like it had the space to breathe, and we had kind of squeezed in that space rings in there, and it just didn't quite work out the way that I maybe wanted it to. So what we're going to do here is build out a little bit here with our kind of newfound interest in the gray tarmac paths as opposed to the red, and just trying to clean this up a little bit with our rock and with our water, and kind of making this feel almost sort of like an expo kind of park maybe. We did go into this with an influence from Space World in Japan and some other things like that. So we're going to go through here with these flowers that we've been using and continue those across. We're going to do a couple of different circular plazas here with a few exhibits in the middle, all those little Martian scenery items. We'll keep our info kiosk as we do. We'll use the spooky fence here because we have the water, and we like the solid bit at the bottom of the fence there that will help mix that together and make it look okay. Add in a couple of little food and beverage items here. I am hiding some of the supports there. One of the tricks, if you don't know it, is to lower a piece of land, place a full tile object in there like a flower bed that deletes the support, and then raise the whole thing up in one go. Like, don't pull a corner, pull the whole tile, and it will keep the flower bed underneath, and the support will be gone. So if you ever need to remove supports in the game, that is the way to do it. That is open RCT and RCT2. So you cannot do that in Classic, I don't believe. But anyway, we're going to continue through here, making this plaza look kind of nice. And I've gone through too and added the sandy texture, that kind of gray tan sand, I guess, underneath of the pathway. Just kind of call out that pathway space, make it look a little better in general. We're also using that monkey puzzle tree too as one of our few landscape tools, just to give it some differentiation. As we've been saying, this is sort of maybe Southwest US kind of location here, where we have this kind of alien landscape almost, but sort of kind of grounded in realism perhaps. Over here we've got our big Splash Boats indoor-outdoor ride that has all sorts of stuff in it, and one of the things that we need to do still here is to finish it. It's got a decent start, but there is still some work to be done. There's also some management to be done. We are still battling our paths being just absolute messy, and we'll go through and fix that up eventually. Here's where I introduced the second of our trees. This is the one fruit tree, and I just wanted a different height tree, and B, something that had a little bit of different color to it, just to give ourselves a little bit of variation. So that was one of the things that I thought we could fit in there very nicely. Also going to continue to plus up this facade just a little bit, add in a third one of the volcanoes, sink in that Martian object there just to give it a little bit of variation. And two, I was never really satisfied with the way that this water ride dropped and then S-bended, I don't know if that's a word, but into the side of the building there, like right up against the facade. If we go the other direction, it gives it a little bit more space to work with. But now it is time for our last coaster, and the first of its kind in our playthrough series so far. This is a B&M Hyper Coaster. So we have a couple things that we want to do here. I want this sort of like a diagonal out and back run. So what I'm testing here is just the overall clashing with the dive coaster, because what I don't want to do is have this view where we build this great coaster, but then it overlaps and obscures our dive coaster. So we want those two rides to be able to interact with each other visually, but not clash with each other visually. So this ended up being the right way to go about it, with the airtime hill, the size, and the location as it was. So now the idea is to go over here, figure out what our turnaround is going to look like, and then try and get it back. So turnarounds are always fairly challenging in these types of coasters, I guess, because you can do a lot of different things with it, but it's hard to make it look fairly smooth. You can also really ramp up your G's if you do something like this where it's just one giant spiral all the way down. There's a lot of different options from kind of complex to simple. I tend to go a little more simple, so kind of like this here, where we go up, have a small curve into a larger curve, into a kind of little S-bend thing. Obviously, the new pieces have really helped in terms of this to try and give us a little bit more variation than what we maybe had before. So we're going to try and incorporate some of those here just to give ourselves a little bit of additional things to use as our toolkit grows. So it doesn't need to be a lot. That could just be pretty simple. I mean, quite a lot of the B&M Hyper Coasters have a fairly simple design as of this. So now we're going to build backwards, get to what our eventual lift hill height's going to be, so now we can see the pacing. Part of this is, once again, removing part of that monorail. If you've been keeping track, that's well into the double digits now that we've modified that thing in our park. So now while we build, we can go ahead and test that whole thing. For a little bit here, I thought about removing this checkerboard, but in the end, it just kind of looked bad. Not that I love the checkerboard to begin with, however, I don't know, it's just kind of, it feels like it belongs in the map, so we're going to put it back and keep the entrance pathway still sort of hidden underneath of there. So now we can build up our return hills, and the way that I wanted the spacing to work is basically the one big hill was going to sort of be centered, and then have two smaller hills that are not necessarily exactly centered on the thing, but kind of sort of close. What I did too is use the larger flat to steep on the diagonal, but then we're going to use just the smaller pieces for the crest, because ideally we want the crest to be a little bit tighter than the climb and the initial pull out and pull in. Because of our pull out of the first drop, we can't go down the whole way, so I'm going to level this out a little bit sooner and try and kind of scooch this pathway or this ride track around the lift hill there and the drop. I did look at some other options here, like wrapping around over top of the water ride or giving ourselves a mid-course brake run. It's not really long enough for a mid-course brake run, so it doesn't really need it per se. So we ended up kind of going right back to where we started initially with this curve there underneath the drop. It's good to explore different options just in case you find something that you like, but sometimes the best is the original, so that's where we landed. What we came up with the first time did work. So we're going to try and do something like this, where we're going to cross over under the drop, back under the lift again, and then we'll have one kind of big finale drop that's going to go underneath of our station. Kind of reworking the station here a little bit to bring it up just a bit. Gives us a little bit more room there at the edge of the map so we can do our larger turn. And now we can have this diagonal brake run too that aligns very nicely with the rest of the track. So it all kind of just lines up in a very pleasant way. And we can go through and kind of get ourselves set up for our return. So right here, it's trying to figure out, okay, how does this actually finish? And what is it going to do? So right here I can see where my turn is, so I've kind of marked this out just in a straight line just to know what I have to align to in order to make it work. Now that doesn't mean we have to align to this. We can adjust the whole thing, and we will here in a little bit, but for now I'm just trying to see how this looks initially. So we're going to kind of come through there with that underground curve into a climbing curve, which is going to do a number on our forces a little bit because we're going to be going fairly fast there, but it won't be too bad. I find these coaster types are pretty darn forgiving in terms of stats. Again, not that we really care about stats, we just don't really want the ultra extreme type things that are going to just completely make this ride unrideable for the general guest. I did look at some other options like more traditional turnarounds, but it wasn't fast enough to do those, and we were a little bit too tall for it. So in the end, I stuck with this more of a modern approach here with the high-speed fast corner into this climbing turn, and we'll have a little bit of a flat bit here into our finale. Ideally, I would have liked some more airtime because that's what these coasters are built off of, is just lots of floater airtime. But in the end, I think it made sense to just kind of put it through like this, so we didn't really have that space to do a whole bunch of airtime hills at the end. So we're just going to do this kind of shallow drop into what will become here a little bit of a tunnel, and then a little bit of a climb into our final curve. So we kind of have a bit of a mix in this layout where some of it is airtime and some of it is kind of corner based. So it's sort of a mix of, say, a Raging Bull, for example, and then one of the other more traditional B&M Hyper Coasters. But I do like this kind of ride. This type of coaster is a lot of fun to build with in the game, so my intention is to do a lot more of these here in the future. But part of what we can see now is just trying to get this thing to line up, and there we go. It's one off, so we can just kind of dip down into the brakes just like that. Have our flat corner there, which I think works just fine. The brake run's not quite as long as it ought to be. We ought to have enough space to park that train not on a curve right behind our station, but it's enough for scenario play. We can balance it fairly well. It's not always quite as cut and dry when you come into scenario play. So now we can start to clean this whole thing up a little bit and figure out how this is going to look. Our landscape isn't super suitable here just because we have all of these bigger craters and other things, so it's kind of challenging to get the whole thing to fit properly. So we're going to have to do a little bit of rework to the landscaping there just to make it look good. But first I did want to reconnect our monorail, which does end up presenting a little bit of a challenge just from the clearances here. As you may recall, these monorails require 3 height of clearance, so that just makes it a little bit more difficult to get it to fit through there. And I've kind of wound it around in a couple different ways just to see what we can do to squeeze it through the space here a little bit, and it's just not cooperating super well. So I'm looking for a whole bunch of different options right here. What I ended up doing was kind of sort of cheating a little bit. As you know, I don't love doing elevation changes on my transport rides, but in this instance, I raised up by 1 and down by 1 inside our buildings, which is going to give us just 1 more height so that we can more cleanly cross over. Over on this side, we're presented with a little more of a challenge because pretty much the coaster provides a wall here that we just can't get through just because of the various knot of track in there. There's just not space to really do much with it. So what I had to do is sort of backtrack ourselves over top of our water ride here and over and underneath of the coasters. And there's sort of one little sliver here over top of the last tile there on the dive coaster that we can squeeze it through. So that's what we're going to do. It's going to look a little silly maybe, but we'll make it work. And I think, again, I'd rather move the monorail than readjust our entire design to fit something that's just not going to be quite as ideal. So that's what we have, and it'll be providing a very nice scenic ride, I suppose, for the monorail too. Get some great interaction with the coaster, but we'll just stick with that. So I kind of leveled off this peak of the hill right here, and we're going to go with one of our larger plazas here, one of these 5x5 kind of star-shaped plazas. And I'm kind of trying to sit this in here in a very nice way so it kind of sits right on top of the precipice of that hill, and it has the coaster basically kind of wrapping around the thing. So we have the dive on the other side, and then it goes into a tunnel, and then it kind of pops out and surrounds it on the other side there. So it has a pretty cool interaction, I think, from a guest standpoint. And we're going to try and do something interesting with the queue too, where we can bring it through to around the coaster, like you can see right here with this tunnel as it dives down and into and underneath of the station. You can kind of set this up. As you see, I'm kind of adjusting the land to set it up for bringing that queue in right over top of that tunnel. So as you're waiting in line, you can be kind of seeing your coaster disappear right underneath of you, and I think that'll be kind of a neat interaction point there. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll go through here and do quite a lot of landscape modification. The nice thing is we have 0 money worries at this point because we've got 40 grand in the bank and more to come. The nice thing is once you hit that kind of critical max that you need to generate income, you really don't have to worry about it anymore. So because we have as many coasters and rides as we do, it is good to go. So here's a little bit of contrast on the landscape too, using some of that sand texture and then the rock and the dirt. That helps us bring in our overall kind of look and feel of the whole thing. We can also build our queue here where we kind of go up incrementally with these little sections of staircases or ramps or whatever they may be. Typically, I try not to do a continuous section of ramp just because you don't really see that terribly often because you always have a landing or something in between just from an accessibility standpoint. So I try not to go more than 2 pathway pieces at once. Sometimes in these scenarios, we just really don't have the ability to do that. So sometimes it's just got to be larger. But in a lot of cases, it's just, it is what it is, and we can kind of make it work where it lands a little bit sooner. And honestly, I think it looks better, to be honest, because it helps you give some variation to your pathway, so it's not just a long straight section. I tend to advise never to have really long straight sections of pathway. Like, vary it, go in, go out, go around stuff, create plazas, create obstacles, and it makes it feel a little more natural, and it doesn't feel necessarily like a point A to point B sort of thing that's just the absolute most direct route. When you think about it, amusement parks and theme parks are an experience, and you want guests to experience that whole space. So you want them to see things. You're not really concerned about efficiency in terms of pathway. You're concerned about making sure that they see what there is to see. You frame views. You position them in certain ways that make sense for the rest of the park. So in that instance, you just think about the way that you do your path work a little bit. I always think about it too. There's sort of two kind of speeds of path. There's the path where you want the guest to move quickly, and there's the path where you want the guest to slow down. And in those instances, you have larger plazas and larger spaces where it just kind of widens out, so that's more of breathing space for your guests. And then in other instances, you have ones where you kind of want them to move quickly between two areas, but doesn't mean it needs to be straight. So you can see, like right here, where we went up and over this mountain pass right here, I guess, to connect across to our Ultra Twister Plaza. Right now it's straight, but we're going to go back in there a little bit and do some adjustments to clean that up just a bit. Meanwhile, we're going back through here and putting back the tarmac instead of the red. So now we're sort of in that approach here. You can see right there I bumped the path out just a little bit to make it fairly interesting. We're going to put some trees in the way, and that's kind of the story there, is maybe the pathway had to bump around because the trees were in the way. So that's a just design consideration as you're building these. Also wanted to do a little bit of this rock work here to kind of frame and nest this queue into it, so it just feels a little more like it belongs in a certain space, which is what we're going to do. Also finish off this kind of mound of rock right here, just because we did sort of pull it away and then we raised up some sections and everything, so we just need to blend it in so it feels kind of semi-natural to the rest of the space. The nice thing is, as we've been doing a lot of landscape modification throughout the rest of the park, as we do more of it, it's going to feel more appropriate because it matches kind of what's going on elsewhere in the map. You don't want to have some kind of, giant landscape structure or whatever, and it's just the only thing there. Unless there's a really good reason for it to be the only one there, it's going to look a little bit out of place. So, in this instance, we've done a lot of this kind of same landscaping throughout, so it feels kind of correct and appropriate and matches kind of what we're going for. Now, too, once we throw in the landscaping here and the fencing, we have another whole layer there, which just really cleans it up and makes it look good, I think. I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out, especially. And I did like the red on this. Just the brighter red, I feel like, still does contrast fairly nicely with the red rock, and I don't know, it just looks very nice in general, I think, for this type of ride, so that's what we're going to stick with for it. We can kind of go through back with our sandy texture there, the tan sand underneath of the pathways. Just helps make your pathway pop a little bit and visually look fairly nice. Lots of fencing needed here because we got a lot of low to the ground coaster stuff, so we want a ride restricted fence, and the post and mesh fence is probably our best bet for that. So that's what we're going to carry through here in a lot of different instances. And to make it feel like we're not just going down some corridor of fencing, that's what we're going to try and use some offsets from the path for the fencing and add in some of that landscaping, add in some of that change of land texture and all that sort of thing. And then we're going to do a little bit of adjustment here too to get around the hyper coaster there. It comes at the expense of kind of chopping up what we've done there for the viewing area around the water ride, but we'll come back and adjust that a couple more times. So what I did here initially was put in a new roto drop, this Intamin Gyro, in this spot, but immediately realized that the visual isn't great because it kind of blocks that nice clean line of the drop, curve, and first airtime hill of the hypercoaster. So instead we're going to put it over here where it doesn't block in any direction. So as I always say, I do encourage you when you place a tower ride to look at it from all four angles, zoomed out just a little bit, and see if it actually does block anything or impede kind of the view of what you're going for. So right here makes sense, and it kind of nestles up against the little bit of hillside right there. So that's going to work very nicely. And now we can replan this whole thing with sort of our same pathway strategy, which is a couple of these plaza areas in a cluster connected together, and then we can do a little bit of landscaping here in the middle of it all. So I think that's going to work fairly nicely. We'll go back with a different color here just to make that a little less in your face. I think we're well on our way to getting this whole section cleaned up. Kind of at this point of our build, we're really just kind of trying to go section by section and kind of wrap up what we have. So for a while here, I did try and squeeze in another pathway here, kind of over the water and connecting around to our other pathway. But there is such a thing as too many pathways after a while. You really don't want to have some kind of absolute spider web of path. So in the end, we're going to remove that one, but sometimes it's worth trying it just to see if it works. And in this instance, it was okay. So in this time, we're going to go back through, revisit the colors for our Ultra Twisters, and I did redo those to make them a little more muted. And I was pretty happy with the way that looked. I think it turned out a little bit nicer. So now we're going to do a little bit of landscape variation here just because it's so flat. And when your whole area looks kind of boring in terms of just flatness of the landscape, do a little bit of landscape adjustment. So little variations here and there, just up, just down. There's very rarely any place in the world where it's just truly flat, especially at an amusement park. Usually you're going to have at least little tiny hills or little rolling hills or just slight elevation change. So I would encourage you to never make your park fully flat. Do it in layers, do one up here, two down there, whatever it may be, just to give yourselves a little bit of adjustment up and down. It just makes the whole park feel a little more natural, feel a little more like it's integrated into the landscape, even if there's not a lot of it, but little adjustments make a big difference. So here we go with a rock kind of backdrop for this whole thing. So again, we're continuing our same kind of design here, and I'm going to bring in the same style of things that I did before. That's the cubes. So I do want to keep this overall look. I did like what we had before. It just didn't quite feel like it was fully baked. So now that we have our style kind of figured out here, we can kind of integrate that a little bit better. And I think you will probably agree that this one just looks a little bit cleaner than the other one. Nice bonus here too is we can put in a little tunnel on our queue and then stack one up on top. Gives us a little bit of height variation there, and it just feels a little more appropriately complete. Once we get in the landscaping there, that really helps it to finish off. The cacti make a good difference too. And the nice thing is cacti do not require just yellow desert sand. You can do them in a bunch of different things and it's going to look okay. So that's kind of what I wanted to go for here. I just think the cacti looks really nice in the overall look. We did have a food plaza back here before, so I want to do the same thing in that area. So we're going to go through here and fill in this little section with a bit of food. Typically, if I have these kind of little areas of landscape that I just don't have anything in, it can be a couple of different things. You can really just tree it if you want a bit of a forest. You can do some kind of interesting landscaping to it. Or you can kind of fill it with little eateries and some other stuff like that. So there's some different options that you can work with. So there we are, removing that pathway that we had put in just because it wasn't quite fitting, but I did stick one extra piece there so we can get the 3-bench situation at the end. I do kind of like that whole idea, even though it doesn't draw in the railing on kind of the end of the path, which I always think is a little silly, but at least we have the space for 3 benches, so it looks okay. And now we can go back through here and just kind of clean up this whole thing. Make it fit, make it blend, and make it feel like it's all part of a single area. Lots of different seating. It's a little bit of a maze back here, but the thing is, no guest is going to wander in here trying to get to something else because it's at the edge of the map. So I don't have to worry about guests getting lost, and they'll just be fine in there. We also have those little nubs of pathways there, and who knows, they will hopefully use the wayfinding to find themselves to a seat, so then we can sit down and eat their lunch or snack or whatever else you got. So now we're going to do a little bit more cleanup over here as we continue our effort to just clean this whole thing up. I did have to lower this little piece of scenic right there, but that gives it a little more variation too. So we'll go back through here and build in our station platform right up against the side of our map, and part of that is even where it was before, one off of the side, we need 2 in order to get an entrance or an exit and a pathway. So we really weren't gaining ourselves anything by having it one in, so why not just build it right up against the edge? And by doing that, that gives us one extra tile in this space that's kind of fairly tight to work with, so I didn't want to go too hard on that. So now by moving over the monorail, it gives us a little bit of space to work with, and we can also now replan this whole space. And part of that replanning is putting the queue inside the structure. Since we do have this kind of nice size structure here, we might as well make it fairly interactive, which is what we're doing here with a section where it kind of pops out by the first section of the ride, and playing around a little bit with the Martian scenery there. But this lets us backtrack out some of this queue plaza outside and give it over to more of the pathway. The adjustments here also lets us move our entrance and exit on the monorail, and that's going to help us clean this up just a little bit more as well. Brings up some landscaping here just to help blend our overall building structure. Kind of back this up a little bit because of the way that RCT 1, I guess, calculates the size of the amount of trains that we can have. We do need a fairly long station for the monorail, which is generally fine. I'm okay with that. Since we kind of have it up on the side there, it's not really blocking anything, and it doesn't look too beefy because we have it up against the side. So now I can kind of do this 3-level plaza deal where we have this kind of transition up to our entrance for the water ride, and we can connect over to our exit for the monorail, and then all we need to do now is connect over our entrance for the monorail, and we have this whole space very neatly put together. Kind of finish off the side here a little bit, but then also clean up this plaza a little. Have some nice overlooks for the splashdown area there, so it's a non-rider portion as well as a rider portion. So something always to consider is how you have the interaction between your folks that aren't riding and your folks that are riding. Generally want to give them at least a little bit of a peek. Now I am bringing up the landscape here in the back, which is going to make our building feel slightly less tall in the back, because you don't want it to be just like totally dominating. Maybe you do in some instances, but in this instance we don't. So now I'll put in our queue for the monorail. I'm going to wrap it around a little bit, and then I'm going to raise some landscaping here to help make that look a little less imposing as well against our skyline. Now we can come back through here with the sand underneath the pathway, and then we're also going to come in with fencing. There's just a lot of fencing to be had here because we don't want guests falling into the water. We also really probably don't want guests messing with our scenic right here, so we're going to go ahead and fence that. So it kind of becomes a little bit of a fenced city right here, but thankfully with the mesh, it's at least viewable through, so you're not like you're in some kind of cattle pen trying to work your way through the area. So I don't think it looks too bad in that instance. We'll also put some wood fence on the back here just to screen the underside of that station as well. I think that looks okay. And a couple of landscape sections here so we can cordon off kind of this area, separate it out a little bit. So we have a bit of a berm without having elevation change. We just have a lot of trees and bushes to help fill in that space. Go with our dirt texture here, which really allows us to dump in a whole bunch of plants and things like that. So we can always do the bush spam, as we say, because it's just an easy way to get density, to get texture, and to make it look good. There are sort of those 2 dark green bushes. You can use both. You can mix them fairly well, or you can do them in clumps where you have one of the darker ones and then one with the little kind of tan berries or whatever it may be. And there's some different options there. But here we go, cleaning up kind of the last of these sections and kind of thinking through what could be inside the building when you think about show scenes. So that's kind of how we do the massing of the space. Now we do have this pathway down here that kind of leads to nothing in particular. And I did at one point think about, could we move that over and across to the Togo stand-up on the other side, but I don't really think it's going to work, so we are going to just loop it around eventually. But now we'll go back through here and do our last ride of today's episode, where we're going to put in one of these flying saucer type bumper car rides. This was sort of an infamously bad Disney attraction initially that never really worked quite right. So obviously it's a great purchase for us, I guess. But I'm going to raise it up on the section here. We got the 4x4 size, which I think does look fairly good, to be honest. I like the way that the platform is textured and has the nice fences on the sides and everything. So we'll go through here, and this helps us adjust our approach to the Ultra Twisters and just gives us another anchor ride back here. So once you get onto the other side of the buildings, there's at least something to look at, look forward to, and spectate on. So this gives us a space for a queue, space for our exit, and helps us develop a couple of plazas here. Now, as we get into our final episode next time, we're going to finish off these back spaces here and then just the overall look and feel. There's still a lot of that cleanup to be done, but we have enough space here for 2 more attractions. See if you can guess what they are. But in the meantime, we're going to fill in our crater here with a little bit of water. I'm going to raise it up a little bit more just to get some height in there. And as I said earlier, here is that adjustment to this pathway, so it's not going to be a straight shot across the whole thing. I want to make it go along this new lake that we've just created, and this is going to open us up some space for one more ride in this section. So that's a kind of nice benefit there, using every available space, but not making it feel too crowded. I think that works just all right. So we'll see you in the next episode for our final build, and we will catch you next time. Thank you very much. Bye now.